This was a really fun episode to record. This was a blast. We had Carter Kilmann come on, and Carter, we could have talked to Carter forever. He had a lot of great stuff to say. It was really fun, really engaging. Actually, after we stopped recording this episode, which this is a long one, this is one of our longer episodes that we've done, and after we stopped, we kept talking with Carter for another 15 or 20 minutes off air because he's just a great guy. He has some really fun things to say, and Jesse and I really felt like we clicked with him and just loved this episode. So he talks a lot about the jump that he made from working in corporate finance to becoming a freelancer full-time, which we dig into on this show. And this is really fun experience, really fun conversation as someone who's thought about doing freelance full-time. It was really enlightening to talk to someone like that. And he wrote a book about his first year of doing full-time writing. So we are giving away a copy of that book. We'll talk about this in the episode also, but 365 Days of Freelance Writing. If you're interested in a copy, we're giving away one for free. I can't wait. This is super exciting. We're going to announce the winner on September 14th, that Monday, and text us at 503-893-2664 to enter. Text us your name for an entry. Text us what you think of this episode for an entry. Text us your favorite episode for an entry, and text us a future podcast topic. So that would be 4 entries that you can get right there if you text us all 4 of those things. So thank you for tuning in and enjoy this episode with Carter Kilmann.
Carter Kilmann is a financial copywriter, an editor, and the author of 365 Days of Freelance Writing. He works with a variety of financial publications, digital marketing agencies, and B2B firms. In addition to Insider, you can find his content on The Points Guy, Rate Genius, and Money Under 30. You can connect with Carter on Twitter, LinkedIn, or reach him directly at carterkilmann@gmail.com, and we will have all of those things linked in the description. He'll be easy to find. Carter, very excited to have you on. I want to start this off and talk about 365 Days of Freelance Writing. This is the book that you wrote. I think you published it in 2021, so it's been a year and a half, a couple years ago that you published it. I'm guessing it took close to a year to write 365 Days of Freelance Writing. I think that logic tracks. But tell me a little bit about what went into writing that book and that process.
You know, it's funny, and just to address that before I dive into like the background,
Yeah.
It took almost as long to do the editing and publishing part of it as it did to write it. I mean, obviously there's actually 366 days of content in there because it was a leap year. Like I just happened to pick a leap year.
Of course.
But I'm not going to put that in the title. That's just
Yeah.
But yeah, then the whole like editing and publishing process almost took an identical amount of time. I think it was like
Wow.
10 months. It's
Wow.
a process, especially
Wow.
when you do it yourself. Like I did self-editing. I had a couple like proofreaders, but they weren't professional editors by any means.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is time consuming. So it takes a while.
Yeah.
But in terms of what went into it and kind of like why I decided to do it, I studied a lot of when I was considering making the switch from full-time corporate world job. I studied a lot of like freelancers and kind of like how they went about things and their course content and all that sort of stuff to learn about freelancing because I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was very helpful. It was very practical. A lot of like structural things for, okay, you do ABC and you'll get XYZ output and all that sort of thing, all those sorts of things. But what you don't really get a feel for is that pulling back the curtain. This is what it's like in the day-to-day life of a freelancer, like the highs and lows, the emotional side of it. And I guess early on, I'm not sure what was the real inspiration, but I was just kind of thinking about that as I started. Once I became a full-time freelancer, I was like, you know what? Like, I think I could share my experience and maybe help other people down the road and turn it into a book. And pretty intuitive to do 65 days of freelance writing because it was sort of like the beginning of my career. There was a little bit of a lag in there. It was like August to December, and then I did January through December was like the content of the book. But it was just one day at a time and sort of wanted to give people direct insight into what it was like to freelance.
I love it. When you started it, did you set out to write a book? Was that the plan, or was it to just document the process and then at some point you were like, hey, I've got months of content now, I can turn this into a book? How did that happen?
No, it was literally to write a book because I kind of figured I don't really have a comparable example that I'd done previously, but I sort of thought about it. I was like, you know what, if I do a little bit, it's sort of like that 1% growth mindset. You do a little bit every day, you'll eventually have that finished product. And especially since my book was literally tied to the calendar, I didn't really have an option. It sort of forced me
Yeah.
to do it. But yeah, I think my mission statement, like at the very beginning, was like write a book that I think I used the words already that pulls back the curtain and like gives direct, transparent insight into what it's like to freelance. And I knew it was probably going to be a lot of like I don't want to say fluff, but like superfluous things like may not always be super relevant just because the idea was I was going to write every day about it. It might be a random Tuesday where I don't have a lot to say. But
Yeah.
in the end, I was hopefully like every time I sat down, I was like, okay, like what am I doing in my business? What can possibly be helpful? What are some challenges I'm trying to overcome? What are my goals? And then I eventually had a finished product.
I love it.
What a really cool accomplishment too. Like now you can always look back and say like I wrote this book. It's you can buy it. You can read it. Is the book meant to be read one like day at a time or more of a binge read?
No, you could kind of binge it, and actually, I know it looks like super long, and it is like it is a lot of pages, but they have a lot of screenshots and examples, like images and things like that, like whether it be a screenshot of an email or like a pitch or just stats and charts and whatnot. Because I put my monthly income in there too.
Oh, very cool.
Like income reports. So there's a lot of imagery and like visuals that fill it up. It really doesn't take that long to read. I had a friend who actually has zero desire to ever freelance or write or anything like that. He just read the book because he's a friend, and I think he finished it in like a couple weeks, maybe.
Oh, wow.
It's not that long. It goes pretty quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I was looking on Amazon, and Amazon's claiming it's like 450, 470 pages or something. I was like, man, that's kind of long. But then when you think about like the charts and graphs and screenshots and stuff, like it's not 470 pages of text, right? It's
Yeah.
And
it's not like dense text either. I think like the pages are the like margins are kind of
72 size font or something.
You wrote 20 words for 400 pages.
Every time someone picks up the book or they're like, oh my God, this is long. I'm like, just open it. It's not that bad.
Literally look at the first page and it won't be as daunting. Like, That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, I'm excited about this. We've done this once before on the show, but we did it after the show. We never did it live with somebody. We are going to give away a copy of your book, 365 Days of Freelance Writing. The subtitle, The Practical Guide to Surviving Your First Year as a Self-Employed Writer. We're really excited about that. And so for listeners, we've done this in the past, and just text in
503-893-2664.
That's right. Text us your name, text us your favorite episode of the show, and text us an idea for a future show. And you can get 3 different entries that way, and we'll do a raffle drawing. Last time we did it 2 weeks, and I think it was too short. So we'll do a month out from publishing. This is going to publish August 14th. And so we will do 30 days out from that. So September 14th is when we'll announce this, or whatever the Monday episode is.
We'll do 365 days out from this.
Yeah, there we go.
There'll be a second book in there as well.
Yeah. So we'll do a month out.
Yeah.
We'll do a month out from August 14th, whatever day that is that publishes. So we'll get some entries to that, Carter. But
yeah. Carter, is there a dream to write another book?
I've contemplated writing a much like shorter version, sort of like because the idea of the first one was sort of the initial year, obviously, like the getting your feet wet, the kind of trial by fire sort of stuff. I've thought about doing another one that's condensed, that's for like that next level, kind of scaling and raising rates and taking your business to the next echelon of sustainability and growth and profitability. But I haven't actually done anything for that, just kind of thought about it. Yeah. I have written a good chunk of an ebook, which is, again, much smaller, much shorter than the other one. for how to essentially grow as a freelancer without cold pitching, because that's like a big piece for a lot of freelancers in the beginning, especially when you're trying to get a book of business and build a portfolio, is cold pitching and a numbers game. And honestly, it sucks because getting like 5 responses that are all rejections out of like 100 pitches is a good amount. Like that's successful, even though it's all rejections. But I essentially built my business without really doing any cold pitching. It was all like inbound leads and referral work. So I've kind of got something in the works with that coming.
Okay.
Soon.
Exciting.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So you're a freelancer, obviously. We've kind of chatted about that. It's been about 4 years since you left corporate job to start freelancing full time. What was the motivation to make that leap, and have you ever looked back?
Yeah, there was it was honestly within a month of, so to give you some background, I worked at SunTrust in corporate investment banking for 3 years out of college. And it was a great job, paid well. I learned a lot, but there was no such thing as work-life balance. It was just work. And I honestly knew within a month of being in that job, even before it really scaled, ramped up in terms of just busyness, I knew within a month that it was not my long-term career. Like it just didn't check many boxes I didn't even really know were there. But I just really wasn't.
When you're starting out of college, you have no idea what you're looking for. So to know a month in that you're like, this is a bad fit, that really says something.
Yeah, for real. I mean, I had no idea what job I pretty much had applied for and what I was about to get into. So yeah, that I know we talked about a little bit before the recording, but imposter syndrome, like I definitely had that early on. Like I remember my first day there, I was just like crippled with fear because I was like, what did I get myself into? I have no idea. But anyway, so I did it for another 3 years. Yeah, so essentially within a month, I knew it wasn't for me, but I wasn't going to just leave a good job I just got out of college when I had no idea what else I was going to do. And so eventually, like a year and a half in, I was like, okay, I know a corporate role really isn't for me. You don't know what you don't know. And so let's look around, just kind of get a feel for things. And I just really went down some rabbit holes on Google and somehow stumbled upon copywriting. I had something I really had never thought of as a concept, and freelancing as well, kind of pairing those together. And I looked into courses and I was like, you know what? Like I've always liked the idea of running my own business. I was never like I write a diary or a journal or whatever, like growing up, or I consider myself a good writer, but I wasn't like, it wasn't a passion.
Yeah.
I just liked the idea of a business, and I saw writing as a means to get there. And so, like I said, I found some courses, took some of those. And then like, once you kind of realize like, oh, this is still going to take a while to get from point A, like, oh, I want to do this, to B, actually doing it. Because then another year and a half or so went by. And in that time, I was just trying to build up a portfolio, get a writer's website, kind of like learn the ropes of the industry. And eventually I checked some conditions, some boxes I set for myself. And like I said, I knew that banking wasn't for me. I was super busy. I was unhappy. I was unfulfilled. I was a shell of myself. I had Sunday scaries every weekend. I dreaded Monday with a white hot passion. My wife then girlfriend, now wife, would say after I quit, like, you are a entirely new, rejuvenated person. Like once I became a freelancer, was my own boss, I was just like, it's like a weight had been lifted. So really, it was just like, to actually put this, I know I'm rambling a little bit, to put it in the context of an episode I listened from you guys. I think I'm not a huge philosophy guy, but it's Epicurean philosophy.
Yeah.
I think you reference in the past.
Yeah.
To kind of put it in that context, I wanted my resting state to be peaceful and balanced. And it was not back then. I was I realized I could start my own business and reach a point where, hey, I will be happier in general. I will have a resting peacefulness. Like, I have balance in my life. I can actually spend free time doing things I want to do. There's a lot of catalysts that eventually came to fruition and did it.
Yeah,
That's cool.
that makes a lot of sense. Sounds like there's a lot of burnout, and
Oh yeah.
I mean the investment banking world is a grind, kind of known for being that, and so I happy to hear that you broke out of that and became your own boss and did the thing.
Well,
Um,
we do have some listeners who work in investment banking, Jesse. So we don't want to say too many bad things about it.
yeah, I
uh,
mean, like
you know,
a great career.
it's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a grueling schedule, right? And
Yeah.
like nobody's gonna dispute that, right? Even especially people that are in it, they know that more than anyone, right? And I think it's cool to be able to look at that and say, like, I'm unhappy, like I'm unfulfilled. My resting state is anxious, is scared, is frustrated, whatever you want to put in that. My resting state is negative, and taking those steps to be able to get to a point where it is better, where you do have more flexibility, where you're able to wake up in a good mood is something that we've talked about with other guests. Where Monday morning you wake up and and you're not angry the first thing in the morning. Like that's a big deal. That's a huge deal, right? It does take some time though to go from that ideation of, well, maybe I'll start like a freelance agency. It's low inventory, it's low startup costs, it's these things, to being at a point where that's paying rent and paying bills and those sorts of things. Like there's a big gap in there. How did you get from the ideation of, okay, I want to start a business, I'm quitting actually day one of being a freelancer, to I'm assuming you're not making a full-time income your first week and month as a freelancer, although maybe it's happened, but how did you kind of get there to a point of stability?
Yeah. And I think it actually preceded that like day one, like I'm now a full-time freelancer. Because some of those boxes I had to check for myself was having a year's worth of runway set aside, just peace of mind, inherent financial stability. I could essentially, that would have been terrible, but if I had made no money for a year, I could have survived. Like,
Yeah.
obviously you don't want to actually do that, burn through a year of expenses, but I essentially gave myself that runway to, okay, let's see if I can get off the ground. And another one on top of that was I had to have a client before I could, a full-time client before I could actually make that transition. Even if I had the runway, I wanted to have something coming in. That was really actually the last condition. I started working with, it's not even remotely in my niche anymore. It was a consumer products company. I was writing product descriptions of like cosmetic stuff. Totally unrelated to what I do now. But it was a client and they were giving me some recurring work. And so once I had that day one, like, okay, I'm a full-time freelancer, I had someone, I had gigs, I had work coming in, and that gave me some stability right away. But like you said, it's a big difference between having something and having a full-time income or like sustainable salary that can pay the rent, pay the bills. That still took time. I think I can't remember really when my first break-even month was. I think like that fall I had a month, but that's part of why I wanted to write the book, is there's so much volatility. Like someone could write an article or post something on social media like, oh, I made 10K last month, or oh, I made 7K, or whatever it is to you. That doesn't mean you made it the next month. Like people annualize things like immediately, like just inherently. But like I'd have a good month one month, and then I'd go back to making like $1,500, like $1,000. And that's not really livable.
Not in most parts of the world.
Not most parts of the world. I could have probably gone to some like digital nomad hub.
Iowa.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, so it took time to get to that point. And I know it's sort of like cliche, but it is literally just putting in time. And especially if you take the strategy I took, which is I wasn't a big fan of pitching. So I just took work as it came to me. And when I didn't have that client work, I wrote for like Medium. Joel, I think you maybe mentioned you wrote on Medium.
I wrote on Medium for a while. I still do occasionally, but not. I was writing really regularly on Medium. The end of 2020, there was like probably 6 or 8 months where I wrote very consistently on Medium, and then I started a new job that got a lot busier, and I was like, all right, well, this is so I write there occasionally, but
so you get like you can make money on that platform. It's not life-changing money unless like you're in the top 0.1%. You're the Tim Bennings of the world or whoever's at the top of that now. So like I would just dedicate a lot of free time to that and try to build up like a personal brand and a following on there. But yeah, it took time for inbound leads to come, and really it was just building up a portfolio, building up a name for myself, making points of contact with agencies, and eventually the right clients come along, and it seems like if you look at that one small point in time, it's like, oh my gosh, how fortunate, what a miracle that this person reached out to me and I can write for them now. But it's like, it's really an accumulation of all the work you put in and all that. Like you're building to that point. So eventually I got some solid client contacts, and they've been steady clients for a while, and it becomes easier to grow because they refer you to places. But all that took like from day one to, I think when I can really say it was stable was like somewhere midway point of, or no, toward the fall of like 2021. And I started July of 2019. So it took like 2 years to get to a point of like actually making like a comfortable amount of money, or like a stable amount. Otherwise it was a lot of oscillation back and forth month to month.
Yeah. So that's something I would love to ask about further. This idea of like your growth is not linear, and some months are high and other months are really low. And that if you're going to put in the work for 2 years, 3 years, right? If you're putting in the work consistently, 5 days a week, 7 days a week, whatever that is, for 2 years, like you're probably going to be able to carve something out for yourself, right? That's based on historical measures. That's enough work that you're gonna land some things, right? You're gonna be able to make some money and have some predictability through that. But 8 months into that, you've been doing it a while. 8 months is a long time, especially in the way that our brains work. Like 8 months is a while to have been grinding at this 5-7 days a week full time. Maybe you're still writing product briefs for cosmetics brands, whatever it is you're doing, and you're like, this isn't the work, this isn't the writing maybe that I want to be doing, and also the money is not good yet. How do you kind of fight off the self-doubt that says, hey, I could go back to corporate finance, or I could go work for any company and get a salary that pays me every 2 weeks. It's going to pay me more than what I'm making writing. How do you fight that off to be able to get to that 2 year point or a little under 2 year point where you are making comfortable money and having that predictability?
It's tough. I mean, you could probably even say there's some fine line between like bravery and stupidity, or like just whatever you want to call it. Because there were some months I wasn't making a ton, but I think you could look at those high months and be like, okay, I know it's feasible. Like I know it's out there. I can do this. As well as you see other people succeed, and I do think this occupation requires self-confidence. A lot of the self words like self-confidence, self-starter, self-accountability, all the self sort of things, self-awareness. Because you really have to be motivated to, like you said, when you're 8 months in, you haven't been making a lot. Like that full-time corporate world salary looks pretty nice,
right?
But I really never had second thoughts about it, even when money wasn't like coming in hand over fist. I think it's having I'd set out for such a long time, put so much effort into getting to that point of being able to start my own business and freelance. And I'd had enough success, even if it was minor on a financial scale. It was like, okay, I know I found what I want to do. I'm going to keep doing it, and it'll eventually pay off. It's sort of like having a vision and committing to, okay, I know it's going to pay off someday. If I absolutely had to, I could go back and get a full-time job. Like that's where the peace of mind from the runway comes in too. It's like, I'm making some money. I've got that behind me. I don't have to make any rash decisions and go back to the corporate world. And I always knew if I had to, I could take a more aggressive approach with pitching and really trying to find clients and whatnot. But I really think it goes back to having that stability ahead of time. that having that behind me made me feel so much better. I never had to really think about, because ultimately, like a reason someone's probably going to fail at this is the money aspect. I mean, you can be an amazing writer, but if you're not making money doing it, you're going to have to figure something else out, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it takes planning from beforehand to like set yourself up to be able to actually achieve your goals and I don't know, set out and make your dreams a reality. But you can't just always set out as an 18-year-old and do that. It takes consistent hard work, like you're saying earlier, which that 8th month is hard. You just got to stick to it at some point. Aside from like just keep on working and then like having some good foresight to say I don't have to worry about money until X date, what are some other traits that have been really important for you to develop as a freelancer?
But it's like I think it goes back to like those self words again. But that if it boiled into one thing, like self awareness or self confidence, to be able to recognize your own sort of triggers and limitations, staying true to like desires and to I must really love this podcast episode of you guys, your values, because that's been a big thing for me. Like going back, I've actually had to do this. No, have to, but I did this more like for 2023. I focused more on value-based things, just coincidentally, rather than goals, and that's been a lot better, a lot easier to kind of like stay on the right path. But yeah, I think it really boils down to kind of understanding yourself, and it took me a while to realize like, oh, like if I keep my phone near me while I work, I'm gonna scroll through it mindlessly. Yeah, or like if I work better if I just immediately wake up and start working, and then like because I used to be when I worked in banking, I'd wake up, crack of dawn, and work out like at 5:30, whatever in the morning, and then go to work. That doesn't work as well like here. I'd rather work out after, and like you just kind of like have to figure out all those little things. So it's really understanding yourself as a person, your schedule, all that sort of all those selves, and then it's easier.
Yeah. Do you have any tools that you've used or any like frameworks that you've put in place that have helped you to foster some of those things in yourself?
I think at least a tool. I started tracking my time in like 2020, I think. Yeah, 2020. I've been doing it for like 3 years, but I didn't do it for the first, 6 months or maybe even a year of freelancing. And I don't know if you guys have heard of Toggle. It's like a
Toggle.
Okay. It's one. I mean, there's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah.
But that was actually a really big one because, like I said, like I didn't realize I was just doom scrolling on Twitter or whatever. And once you start tracking your time, it sort of fosters this sense of urgency. And it's like, oh, I'm doing myself a disservice if I'm just looking on Twitter or Facebook or playing a game on my phone or whatever. It sort of creates that sense of urgency of like, okay, this is work time. Like I'm dedicated. The clock's running. I'd say that's probably the biggest tool. And then just trying to stay organized with like task lists and keeping things straight. But I do all that in a Word doc. It's probably if digital things can be old fashioned, like it's sort of like an old fashioned way to do it.
I love it. No, because like I've used like Asana in the past, or like some of the others. Like I use HubSpot now. It's like what my company uses. But in the past, I've used Airtable and a bunch of those different platforms that all are built to like make you more productive and things. They're just fancy to-do lists. Yeah. And like I think there just are like so many features in there that are like jam packed to like, oh, like this will make you more productive and more efficient. And I'm like, I just don't know where my to-do list is in this platform. Like there's too many things going on. I just need to know, what do I need to do next? When I finish a task, like what am I doing now? Honestly, I think a Word doc is as good a place as it. I write physical to-do lists every day, like my journal, because I'm like, otherwise I just am going to spend half the day doom scrolling, right? And like, and then get to the end of the day and I'm like, yeah, there was some things that I meant to get to that I just didn't think about when I came back from lunch and forgot about here. And yeah, I think the old-fashioned Microsoft Word list is as good as any.
Yeah, like you said, I just need a list. Like there's what is this? called Notion. Have you guys heard of that?
Oh yeah, Notion's getting pretty popular right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell there's a ton of like features, and it's really all the capabilities and kind of what it can do for you if you learn the platform. But I like the simple to-do list. I don't need to like try to figure that stuff out. Like I spent like a day on it and I was like, you know what? I'm cool with just my Google Doc of like 1 through 5, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. Like that works for me.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever it takes to just get the work done. That's Jocko Willink talks about that, where he says your list, your strategies, your plans, all of that, like that self-help gurus like to talk about. It's like all of that is just like just motivating you to actually do the shit in front of you. And if you could do the shit in front of you without those things, don't bother with those things because they're not what's important. What's important is actually just go and do the work. And
yeah. It's funny when productivity apps make you unproductive.
Yeah. Spend like
It
3
is.
hours trying to get all organized for the next day, and then, well, and actually I forgot to check it again. Waste 3 hours. I find, I think like a task manager app is just like a to-do list with like a pretty face of makeup or something. I don't know. For me, it helps. I always call my Salesforce like my task manager instead of my to-do list, but all of them are just ways to be organized and keep tracking things.
Aren't you your task manager?
I guess I am my task manager. I don't know.
Philosophical question for you. Like, who's really managing the tasks?
Yeah. I love it. Let's switch gears a little bit. You are a financial copywriter. I love to talk about finance. I could talk about finance all day. How do you like approach investing? There's a lot of data out there on like individual companies, and if you take a quick look at Morningstar or Yahoo Finance or something, and just look up any company, there's pages upon pages of data, valuations, financials, and graphs and charts, and it's a lot to take in. How do you try to make sense of that, and kind of how much does that matter on an investing basis?
It's overwhelming, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
like you said, there's just so much data and like so many publications and sites, and you have like niche newsletters on other sites. And I don't know if you guys know Substack. Like, there's research there. Like, you can look anywhere, and there's just so much information. And
Yeah, I
it's just
subscribe to this guy on Substack, Due Diligence, that just is that's Carter's Substack, but
yeah, I took a step back from it recently, but yeah,
a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
I was doing it weekly, like regimented. I'd done it for like 2+ years, but it just took so much time.
Yeah.
And as the business side, so I have the freelancing side and the creating side. As the freelancing side took off, something had to be sacrificed, and unfortunately, it was the newsletter. But
Yeah.
it's still there. It's still active. I'm just going to take a much slower kind of come as you go pace. But
I'm a fan of that. Yeah.
To get back to your question, individual stocks now probably only comprise like a fraction of my investments, maybe like 15 to 20%. But it's funny because like when I first started investing, when I was working at SunTrust, it was like all individual stocks, and that's kind of how I learned about the stock market and how to analyze. I was learning about how to analyze companies in my day job, and I was trying to sort of apply that to the stock market in my own investment portfolio.
Yeah,
and that's kind of how I learned about it and built up a random portfolio of stocks over time. And it comes to a point where there's that word again. It's overwhelming. Like it's time consuming to dive into companies. That I eventually kind of started prioritizing like passive index funds and bonds as my primary investments. And I still have, like I said, like 15 to 20% of my money in individual stocks that I kind of have a small portfolio of. But yeah, there's just so much information out there. There's literally thousands of ideas, and it would back then I would read Barron's and the Wall Street Journal and all that, and you'd find a interesting company or industry. Then you dive into that, and like I said, SunTrust helped prepare me to be able to kind of do some of those things. And then, as we've referenced, I eventually started a newsletter on it. And so I enjoyed looking into individual companies, but it's so overwhelming to try to stay on top of individual companies. Say there's 10 in your portfolio, 10 individual companies every quarter, new earnings, your own goals and risk tolerances perhaps are moving and changing. And these companies, you're trying to stay on top of them, and you have a day job when a social life and all these other things. It got to a point where I was like, you know what, my individual stocks are, I think I literally had my account labeled like long-term holds or like ultra long-term holds, whatever. Just companies I bought, I'm going to hold them for a while. I'll keep tabs on them, but otherwise it's index funds and bonds.
Yeah.
For short-term holds.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just there's too many things to try to keep track of as an individual investor. And there's just easier ways to get the goals achieved, to have their money actually work for you, where I find, like, for some people it's a really fun hobby to like read in and like see like, oh, their financials are looking really good, their earnings hit targets, like great things here and there, but kind of have to be really specifically interested in that and have it be honestly unrelated to your actual investments, and more just like, some people read about football, some people read about stock prices and companies and company financials. Probably more people read about football as their hobbies, but
and that's pretty much me to a T. And it's funny you explain that, because that was almost spot on me. I think because I love him. My father-in-law is that exact person. He lives to read like financial publications, and like he gets the Barron's every Saturday. He reads the Wall Street Journal. He's got AAII, which I forget what it stands for.
Oh yeah,
he's got all of these subscriptions to all these things, and he reads all of it. He just consumes all of it, and he stays on top of it. And he runs his own portfolio, and he has for essentially since he started working 30, 40 years ago. And he's that kind of person that I know. He's like who the person you're describing. You have to be so committed to it. And I think because I can see that person, and I can see what you would need to do to be on top of that for the entirety of your life. Not for me. Like it's already, the odds are stacked against you that you're going to outperform the market as it is. He can, because he's dedicated. I'm dedicated to other things. Right. You know what I mean? Like I like reading about football. Like I'm a huge sports fan. You can't really sacrifice and cut that off and be happy about it. So
yeah,
I'm cool with passive approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good thing just to hear in general. I mean, I very much align with a similar philosophy there. And when I first started getting into finance, I think finance as a whole does a pretty bad job of like marketing itself in that sense, where it's like, oh, you're interested in finance? Go read Netflix's financials and then tell me if they're actually a good investment. And it just does this kind of daunting, like almost gatekeeping thing to be like, you can't be successful, you can't be interested in money if you aren't interested in what is it, EBITDA and like all their weird finance and accounting acronyms. And I just think that's so actually counter to a helpful approach. So it's helpful to hear another person kind of agree there and say, yeah, there's easy ways to do it. You can set it and forget it, go passive index fund, and find a lot of success there.
This podcast is very pro passive index fund. Pretty much everyone that we've brought on to, like, all the times that we've talked about like investing in and like personal finance on this show, no one has been like, oh, you should like be putting in all the effort and all the reading to like go manage your own single stock portfolio. But I think it's a little bit deceiving in the market, because the media doesn't talk that way. Like you don't hear, like, mutual funds are never in the news, almost never in the news, right? But what's in the news is that like Tesla's up this quarter, or like Nvidia's up this quarter. And like this year to date, like the NASDAQ is doing really well because of Microsoft and Nvidia and whatever companies. I don't sign me on those, but and I think it's easy as like someone who works in business, who like has some sort of financial background and some financial like intuition. It's easy to get caught up in that because there's so much of that swirling around of like, oh well, like this stock is actually not a buy anymore, it's a hold, and now it's a sell, and they get all these different ratings. It can be overwhelming, to borrow your word back.
Yeah, it's just so much to stay on top of. And again, nothing against those people. Like,
Totally.
props to you for being able. And I think there is middle ground. Like I said, I still have a small portion, a sliver of my investments are companies that I've looked into personally and analyzed and think have potential in going forward in the future. I think that you don't have to go one or the other. It's not like you have to be all in or you have to be all passive. I think and it's funny because this comes up a lot with some of the clients I write for who are in like investment management, asset management, like hybrid investors or like a subcategory of people out there where they still want a financial advisor, but they also want to have some say over a certain portion of their portfolio and invest based on their own ideas and individual stocks and whatnot. And I think that's great. Like I said, I do it. And if that means you have like a slightly less diversified portfolio and you only have like 5 stocks in there, yeah, there's some risk to that, but it's only a small fraction of your portfolio. You can afford some risk, and 10-15% of your wealth is concentrated in these companies that you're really supportive of. You've done the work and researched. Then yeah, go for it. I mean, that's how you have a $10,000 kind of side portfolio become possibly $50K if you really put the time in and see those companies. You buy like a Tesla before they pop, or you bought Carvana when everyone crushed it. Now it's up like I think 1,000% since like January. That's how that kind of stuff happens. But there's a balance.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of about setting aside some play money or some personal picks and understanding that like that doesn't have to be your entire investment portfolio. And I mean, a lot of my friends in college a couple of years back were like, well, I'm trying to pay for my college with Dogecoin because I think it's going to the moon, right? And so you don't want to be a completely uninformed investor, but you also don't have to be like a literal technical expert on everything finance to be able to have some success in investing and be able to achieve your goals there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. At the end of the day, it just comes back to what your own goals are. It's not like, I mean, maybe someone is out there, but it's not like you're sitting down like, I want to 10x my money in like a year. Like that's not a realistic thing. Like
right.
You're trying to buy a house one day. You're trying to buy a car or vacation and like whatnot. So long as you achieve those goals, who cares really what else? Like, you don't need to put all your money in Dogecoin to make that happen.
Right.
You shouldn't.
And it comes back again to like
Dogecoin.
What was that, Joel?
You shouldn't put all your money in Dogecoin to try and make that happen. Like that's
probably good.
We don't do financial advice on this show. Like there's, the SEC is going to come after us. I feel pretty confident saying you shouldn't only own Dogecoin.
That's not financial advice. That's just common sense right there. So another thing I've read you write a little bit about, and I'm fascinated because I know little about this. Analysts often use price targets on like individual stocks on kind of a short and a long-term horizon. How important do you think like forecasting performance is, and like how accurate can forecasting and projection be within investing?
Most likely inaccurate. I mean, like the best forecast you're going to have, like you're trying to be as least wrong as possible because you're going to be wrong to some extent. Right. But I think it's funny you mentioned price targets because there's a not old article, but maybe old by standards now. It was like from like 2019. It was a Barron's article that essentially asked like, do price targets really matter? I mean, at the end of the day, like what are they? Like who uses them? do they matter? And I think they found that 5% or so of the stocks in the S&P 500 actually had buy ratings, but their price targets are lower than what they were currently trading at. This obviously doesn't make sense.
Right.
No.
And I mean, price targets from Wall Street are really just like 12 months in advance. That's essentially what that analyst is saying, what they're targeting for that company. But it can move, and everyone's valuation process is different. You can have one analyst say, I don't know, Tesla's going to be 1,000, and another says 1,000, but they have completely different processes for getting to that number.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to kind of, when you're looking at those, understand what went into those figures. But at the same time, at best, they're really just like pulse checks on what the market thinks about those companies. And you got to think who's making them. It's Goldman Sachs, it's Morgan Stanley, like sell side firms that are really have sort of an agenda of, okay, we want wealth managers and asset management companies and who have you to buy these, to invest with us and give us AUM and to buy these stocks. So it's sort of like marketing materials to a degree. So in that sense, like, not to be punny, don't put too much stock in them. Because at the end of the day, like I said, forecasts are usually wrong. I do think it's still important to kind of have your own sort of price targets in general when you're investing. Like, obviously, at the end of the day, it matters how much other people are paying for it. So price does matter. Mm-hmm. But it's more so of like okay, like I'm investing in this company at $50, like based on my read of this company and sort of industry experts and research and whatnot. I think they can get to this number in X years or 1 year. This is kind of like where I would like to see them go. And you kind of just use it as a barometer of like, okay, once they hit that point, is that your selling point? Like, you kind of it's a reason to reevaluate the business. And do you exit that investment at that point? You lock in your profit, or do they still have room to grow? I think it's not really like a set thing. It's more of like a complement to your analysis and kind of keeps you directionally headed somewhere. But it's not something you, again, put stock in.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of matches up again with, like, we're talking about the benefits of some passive investing and the diversified funds, that you don't need to put as much weight in like price targets for an individual company, and it just takes out a lot of the complexity from the investor and kind of puts it on the fund. And you can just say like, I don't really have to worry about locking in my gains the same way. You can just literally set it and forget it, and not get caught up in some of the behavioral traps that are easy to get caught up in, of like, I bought this at 50, it's at 20 now, but I believe because 6 years ago I thought it was going to 100, and I can't be wrong, and I can't prove, and so it can get kind of dicey to really latch on to a number, whether that's what you bought it at or whether that's what you projected it to go to. And like, I don't know, I think a big thing I think about a lot is, even if you buy something, like buy a stock and it goes down, that doesn't mean you're dumb. Like, that doesn't mean you did a wrong thing. Like, that's kind of part of the game. Sometimes investments go down in value. If it was guaranteed they'd go up, then it wouldn't have any risk. And that's, there's a lot of correlation there. But
the only investors who don't get losses are people like Bernie Madoff, who are very famous for fraud. Like, everyone else takes losses.
For sure. I mean, it's all fluid. Like you said, but we have these biases that we latch onto, like that's anchoring bias, right? Like, you get fixed on that $50, and that's like, oh no, that's what I paid for it. That's what it's worth. But yeah, like that's why I don't think it makes sense to kind of latch onto even just some earnings metrics in general. Like, don't get so caught up in like, okay, they have to hit $2 EPS or anything like that. You get sort of lost in those numbers, and you're going to probably be more susceptible to those behavioral kind of like kinks.
Right. Well, and it all feels like it's going to be forever. Like, oh my gosh, this company didn't do as well this month or this quarter or this year, and that often misses the bigger picture of like, oh, there was a pandemic, the economy shut down. It kind of explains a little bit more. or like in the 2008 crash, like every single stock went down because people like pull out of the market. Doesn't mean specific companies, all of them, some of them made pretty bad decisions, some of them went under, right? But that doesn't mean that every single company was like doing awful. So I think kind of having the long-term approach also helps anchor, not the anchoring bias, but helps anchor against the storm and the craziness of the waters that investing can feel like if you're trying to go on a quarter by quarter basis or a month by month or even riskier day by day basis and, and do the day trading, whatever.
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, the shorter that timeline gets, the more like just prone it is to fluctuations from just macro activity. I mean, the company could be perfectly fine in its own little world, but you have, like you said, the pandemic, or just tech stocks fall because people are selling them now and everyone starts selling them and they fall over. But that doesn't mean the company's all of a sudden doing worse. It's just that's what people are doing. And like you said, the longer you expand that horizon, the great, like you said, nothing's guaranteed, but the greater your chances of there being gains. At least historically, like 20-year periods, I don't remember the stat, but they're positive. Like
they look good.
The number up, it's like 90% of the time. Like I don't know if that, don't quote me on that, but it's the longer your horizon, the better off you are. Versus like I wrote about it once. It was, I think the stock market on a day-to-day basis is up. It's like a coin flip. I think it's like 51 to 49%. Like if you're day trading, it literally could go either way.
It's a coin flip every day. You mentioning like you wrote about it once piques kind of a question for me. Like when you, this is a shift of gears. When you've got like a new client reaches out or an existing client reaches out, so it's like, hey Carter, I want an article. Is that what it looks like? I want an article, or do they say I want an article about price targets, or do they just say like we want content? What does that look like?
It can be broad, and it also matters like the introduction of that question. If they're reaching out to you, it's a completely different ballgame than if you're going to them, because they might, if you're pitching and you're going to them, you kind of have an idea of what they should want versus them. Like they probably have no idea what they want, or they might have some semblance of an idea, but if it's a company that's never had a blog before, they don't really know what that process is like, or maybe what content they want to cover and how often and all that. But so it can be broad, and the processes for one client and kind of their asks and the amount of, just to like give you an example, I used to write for an auto refinancing publication, and they gave you briefs like with every assignment. And they'd say like, hey, here's a topic on refinancing for veterans. Here's keywords. Here's kind of like the type questions to answer, things to touch on. And you sort of have it all laid out for you. Versus I've had other clients in the past be like, I want to talk about retirement planning. And that's it. You just have to go from there. And it's up to you to kind of figure out like, okay, like what questions do I need to ask them up front? Like what are maybe some of your specialties that you want to hit covered in this? What are some common questions asked by Google users? You can kind of use that to frame what you're going to cover. What are other pieces of content out there? What kind of stuff do they talk about? It can vary so much in terms of like what you have to do up front. And then same sort of, that's all content related. That's not even touching on copywriting, where you kind of have to focus more on like, I mean, not that it's not important with content, but audience and sort of like what you're selling and sort of things you might need to like walk on eggshells a little bit about if it's like compliant, especially in finance and compliance related things. There's just a lot of inputs you have to consider. So I don't know if that answers your question. It could be so broad what the ask is.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good data. That's just really interesting. And I'm thinking like, if I were to come to you, just trying to think, oh yeah, what would I be looking for there? Some dude on LinkedIn who I found who does writing about things. It's helpful on either side if I'm trying to become a freelancer, or if I'm a company hiring a freelancer for something. Or if you come to me and say, hey, have I got the deal for you, right?
Yeah, it can be, like I said, it can be super broad with a lot of different inputs, and everyone has a different review process, and it can be a lot. But the more broad things I see or more unique things I see, the better off I am. So
right.
some of those review processes are a bitch too. Like, I worked in blog publishing at Intel for a while, and
Oh god.
so we had stories that like got written pretty quickly, and we worked with like a lot of like contracted writers, and so we would work with like we'd bring in an engineer who like was from Intel, and they would have done some cool research or work on the some exciting new technology, and we'd bring in like a contracted writer to do to like ghostwrite a piece for them. And so they're working from a presentation or whatever, and they get it done. And then it would take, in some cases, 2 or 3 months of like reviews from different people to get this work done. The work that took a week and a half to do, like 2-3 weeks to do, right? Like sometimes the work was really quick. If we're like, oh, we've got like this presentation and here's like this, they've written some Word docs about it, and like here's the stuff that they said about it 6 months ago, like give all that to the writer that the writer could put it in place, and sometimes really quick timelines, and then it just sits on the shelf as different lawyers review it and different stakeholders review it, and the byline author has to review it even though they've never read it, right? And and then like their manager has to review it, and you get like 15 different voices in here. That was. Yes.
Oh yeah, that's so routine now. Because there's just so many. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a voice, and once they're going to agree on things, disagree on things, and if someone wants a drastic enough change, you're going to have to start the whole process over again. Like especially in an industry like finance, where there's compliance things that have to be considered, because there's like Intel. I'm sure this was big too. Like lawyers had to be involved, so they could strike things, and it has to come back to square one again. I can't tell you how normal it is now. Just like I submit something, there might be a round of edits, wait a little while, another round comes back in, and that thing doesn't even eventually get published for like months. Like it's like, oh, remember that thing you wrote back in February? Like it's just published. Like, oh, cool. Like, good thing I don't need like that for the portfolio anymore. Like
Yeah, really. Yeah, and sometimes when you're working with legal too, it's not a question of they're like, oh, you can't say it this way. They're like, we're not going to talk about this section. Like this was your main point. It's not going to be in there. Like we're no longer talking. And it's like, what do you want this thing to say? Like that's our point. That's the thesis statement for the whole article, and you just took that out. Like now it's all fluff. Like, oh yeah.
I had that once actually. I won't name any of the people, obviously, or companies, but I was writing a white paper for like a fintech company, and it was on like the growth of specifically, sort of like the growth of financial advisors and the individual investor, and growth of individual investing in like the digital age kind of thing. And I had like a bunch of catalysts for why that kind of came to be. And here's another example, to quick side note, of a client that was like, we want a white paper. We wanted it to be about advising. And that was it. I was the freaking thought leader behind the whole thing. But like, I had like these catalysts, and one was I kind of maybe was walking on like a line a little bit. But it was essentially like so I pretty much ragged on the too big to fail banks, and like I wrote something like pretty, maybe a little aggressive towards them. Like I don't remember. It was like some play on words with too big to fail, and it was like this full section on it, and like it got through I think the first reviewer, and then like someone saw, I don't know what they were, a manager or whatever, and they just like strike the whole thing. They're like, Wells Fargo is a client of ours. Like they were one of those like banks back then. Like we can't do that. So, like I've seen plenty of that, like where just stuff gets struck, and it's like, nah, that comes with the territory.
It does, man. How do you kind of deal with not taking that personally? Maybe that's leading.
I think it's one of those, like, with the more times you kind of get stung, the less you build up like a little bit of an immunity to it. I don't think it ever totally disappears. Like I think what improves is like, when someone says something biting or is like critical or negative to you, there's that kind of sting of whatever pang of negativity inside of you, that negative emotion. I think that kind of lessens. Like I remember probably one of the first first couple times I got feedback that was negative, that like sensation lasted. Like I thought about it a lot. It consumes you, and you kind of get wrapped up in it. And you're like, oh no, writing is very personal. Like, oh, someone didn't approve of my writing, like my thoughts. I had one early client who was a marketing agency, like almost like an influencer, but they had their own like agency, and I was writing YouTube scripts for them. And I don't remember even what the topic was, but it was financial related, stock markets, assets, whatever. And I wrote a script for it, and like the response literally to it was just fluff, like all capital letters, like that was it. And there was no other feedback. Oh, but that's so much to go off of. But like that weighed on me for like a while, and I wrote about it in my book. Like that consumed me for a bit. But this poor other girl. The other one was like fluff, terrible. No one will ever find this useful. Like it was worse.
Oh wow!
Oh my gosh! But it's just you got to let it kind of just roll off your back. Like it comes with the territory, and the more haters you have, usually is a good thing, because I mean you're doing better. Like I wrote stuff on Medium that's gotten some negative feedback, and it bothers you for like a half second. And it's like, you know what, that's their opinion, whatever. Like, you're helping my engagement by commenting. So thank you.
Yeah, when Jesse and I got this was a silly moment, but when we got like our first thumbs down on YouTube, we were like, hell yeah, someone cares enough to like hate it. Like, that's awesome. Like, yeah. Man, and now that's all we get. Just no. That'd be a different problem. Yeah.
You just gotta get the first one out of the way.
Yeah, and I think it is like, I think that's a good note for anyone, that like we all get feedback in our roles, and we all should be getting feedback in our roles. That's the best way to grow, and that like it can feel so very personal, because you poured your time into this, you poured your energy into this, you care about this work that you're doing, and it can feel really personal. But it is important to remember that like, no, they're not saying that I'm a fluff writer. They're saying that like this text, these words on a page, that's fluffy, and like, cool, I can go change that. That's no problem, right? And that it's not about, oh, Carter did such bad work. It's that like, no, we hate the work that's in front of us. Like, I don't care who did it. Like, I don't want this to be what we publish. And I think it is a little bit of like a impersonalization that I think that I've benefited from going through, of being able to say like, oh, like they're not upset at me. They just don't like what's in front of them. They don't care who did it. They don't care where it came from, but they have a standard that they, have in their head for whatever reason. And this work doesn't match their expectation. And that's the problem. It's not that they're angry at me, but although I guess sometimes they might be, but generally they're not. Like, usually,
Yeah, you usually know. And I mean, it's still feedback at the end of the day. I mean, the fluff withstanding, because that really didn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
Generally, like if someone doesn't agree on something, they're going to give a reasoning, and you can kind of assess it and analyze it, and kind of like, okay, here's how I can make this particular piece of content or writing better. Here's maybe how I can, if it's something that has more broad applicability, like here's how I can improve future pieces, because we didn't like how you did this in this conclusion or whatever. Like, okay, maybe I can take that elsewhere. And that's a lot of this job. And you kind of going back to sort of the traits it takes. It's all those selves, and like you got to be self-confident, self-aware, kind of like this steel mindset of like, okay, don't let other things bother me, whether it's feedback or imposter syndrome, or like, because it's going to happen. You're going to feel emotions. Things are going to happen. Don't play the comparison game. Like, I can't tell you how many times, like when I was early on writing, and I'd see these successful writers who were clearly further along in their careers. Like, it wasn't a fair comparison, but I'd see them, and like, whether it was the money they're making, their outputs on Medium, to like Tim Denning, he wrote like 10 articles a day. Yeah. And I'd see that and be like, I can never do that. Like, how could I ever possibly be successful if, like, I can't do that? And it's like that's just not the mindset. And you got to realize, like, kind of reconfigure, like, okay, if he can do this, I can do it. Or if they can make X amount of money, here's how referring to your podcast again, putting that system in place and kind of like to be able to reach those milestones or to bring you to a point of like, okay, you can reach that financial stability or be able to reach this word output or be able to write for these big brands. But you got to put the processes in place and focus on what you can do going forward. But yeah, I feel like that's really the trait you got to bring to the table. It's just like focused and like future oriented. Like, here's how I'm going to keep improving. Don't let the emotions get the best of you, because it will at some point. You just got to bounce back. I've had it plenty of times.
Yeah. No, I think that's super important for freelancing, for working a 9 to 5, for investing, for dealing with your personal finances. Like, emotions come and go, and really there's like learnings that come from the feedback instead, and that you don't need to make all these wild emotional decisions and bold emotional decisions, because your emotions are going to, tomorrow you'll feel something different, right? Like the next day you'll feel something different. Like, you shouldn't always be acting on those, right? Like, it's okay to just feel them, learn from it, and move forward. And I think that's an important lesson to keep in mind and remember.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, what if you do act on it and you take it personally, and then you, I don't know, fire back at them? That's how you lose a client. And then like, that's your livelihood right there. Right. Like, you can't be making those like sort of decisions, or like, you can't let things eat at you, like imposter syndrome or whatever, because then you won't be able to bounce back and make this work. Like, it's corralling the emotions is definitely one of the biggest hurdles as a solopreneur in general. Like, it doesn't even have to be freelancing, starting your own business, and what have you. This podcast, I'm sure there are times where it can be frustrating, or like things can take longer than you'd anticipate, or finding guests, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there are frustrations that you guys have to overcome and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. Just anytime you're tying up a lot of your time and effort and energy and care and love and all these things into a product or a service or a project or anything like that. I mean, it's a big investment, and it becomes a part of you, and it's hard to then not take any criticism toward that or feedback toward that personally, but it is so important for the long-term perspective on it and the long-term success and health of both yourself and the project or the job or the business that you've created. And I think you have a lot of really good things to say there. Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing all that.
Yeah, and that's actually a big reason I've only actually started listening to it over the last few days, but y'all's podcast, I love the concept. It's like y'all understand and are committed to this idea of like, it's a work in progress. It's the whole idea is growth. Like, it's not like we expect to be perfect, like right off the bat, or trying to be something that's well beyond what a podcast could possibly be within like 3 months. Like, you guys like have this just mentality of like, hey, like, we're figuring this out as we kind of go, or I think it was your like 12-week review sort of podcast. It was kind of like, here's the like where I could potentially see my comfort zone being expanded in like 6 months, whatever. I think it was talking about like nutrition or or like meeting with experts that in fields where you aren't comfortable. Like, I think that's awesome, and that's why I'm going to keep listening. It's like, okay, I can grow alongside you guys and sort of learn about these topics, and I think there's a lot of overlap in that kind of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I appreciate those words, Carter. That is going to keep us going for a while. But no, like, it is a work in progress, right? And like, that's not unique to this podcast either, right? Like, I see my career that same way, and like a lot of things, right? But it is like, I'm in my 20s. Like, I'm not going to have it all figured out. I am willing to bet I'll never have it all figured out, but I know I'm not going to right now, right? And so, stepping into this podcast, and every time we bring on a guest, it's like, okay, like, what did we do with the last guest that worked well? What did we do with the last guest that, like, yeah, we shouldn't have done that again? Like, the way that we used to introduce guests, like before we started recording, like, I had like a little bullet pointed list that I would go down with all of our guests before we started recording. And like, I don't know, maybe a month ago, Jesse pulled me aside, and Jesse was like, you gotta stop doing that. And I was like, what? I was like, that's really good. And Jester's like, it makes them nervous. We can tell it makes them nervous, and they don't need to know all the things that you're telling them. Like, you need to know the things that you're telling them. Stop bothering them with that. And I was like, but it's important. And he's like, not for them. Stop doing it. And like, so we didn't do that with you. But like those sorts of things is like, no, we're figuring this out. We're going to continue figuring this out. We're going to continue growing. And the goal is that this episode that we're recording is a better process than last episode, or really is than a better process than, 4 or 5 episodes ago, because we're not growing linearly, right? Like we're not, this episode is not going to be necessarily better than last episode. The next episode may not be better than this episode. It'll ebb and flow. But if we've done 10 episodes, like our 10th episode should be better than our first. Like we should be moving in that direction, even if it's not every individual. So
yeah.
I appreciate
you to say this is going to be the best episode ever.
This is an outlier because this is going to be the top.
This is the standard.
Yeah, we peaked.
Yeah.
But no, I think it helps too that there's 2 of you guys. Like, if it would have just been you, Joel, you probably would still be reading off.
I'd still have a book and a half that I'd be reading to guests before you get online.
The list would be longer. Yeah,
it would. Yeah, absolutely. And like being able to take feedback and criticism from each other has been like a huge growing point for us, and been a huge like way that we're able to grow and iterate together too. That like Jesse sees this show very differently than I do, and so we get to learn from each other and leverage each other's strengths and grow from that. And we wouldn't be able to do that if we're taking everything personally and getting upset and fighting back and forth. That no, there's grace, and we're both just trying to do a good job, and that's what it comes back to. Yeah,
for sure. That's definitely evident in just talking with you guys and also listening to the prior episodes. I think you guys are doing some awesome things. Can I interview you guys for a second? Like, is that allowed on the?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Becoming ourselves firsts.
Yeah.
What kind of like? I know the concept is sort of to grow, and you understand it's not linear and all that. But do you guys have your eyes set on like we want to achieve this in X months? Like I don't know much about podcasting. I'm just curious. Like, what are your, not to get into SMART goals because I know we're not a fan of those here. Like what I guess are milestones that you're maybe trying to get to in like the first year, or like what does that look like?
Jesse, I'll let you talk to this if you want. Or I have an answer, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first because my answer is less thought through here. I have more individual milestones for this podcast, and like the big things for me, like I talked a little bit about in that 12 weeks of reflection episode, is like getting more comfortable talking to people I don't know, making more sense when like there have been guests who have said something that like catches me off guard or I don't know quite what to do with, and being able to say like I need to respond here somehow and try to work on my own. Like, how many times did I say in there before I got a cohesive thought out? Or just how am I making a good first impression on most of these guests I haven't met before the episode starts? And so how am I creating a space that lets a guest show up and feel like comfortable sharing their own like opinions? Like, we're asking about expertise, but in a different space. You're on camera, you're being recorded. Like, how do I foster a space? How do I play the part in making that a welcoming spot? And so I have a lot of like those personal development ideas that I'm working toward. As far as like the actual podcast goes, I think I would say applying our value is more continuing to grow. And so that doesn't mean 1,000 subscribers. That means more subscribers than last.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit less measurable there, but I think lets us not anchor as much on the failing of like, we haven't hit this target yet, but we have grown. And so saying like, oh, it's trending up.
Yeah. I think I like actually that there's a personal side of it too, and like that development, because I feel like if you focus on, okay, here's how I'm going to get better, you don't really worry about like you said, like, oh, we need to hit 1,000 subscribers, whatever. It's like, here are the things I'm going to get better at. I'm going to get better at talking to people and kind of getting a read on. I hadn't even really thought about that. You got to control the conversation. Like, you're like emceeing this conversation. Like, you got to read the flow and like think about that sort of stuff. I'm sure that's a challenge. I mean, I'm riffing here, and it can be still hard to like come up with questions and whatnot. So yeah, I think that's an awesome approach, and I have respect for those sort of milestones and sort of values you're kind of setting for yourself. That's cool.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is, so we started this, we published our first episode April 10th, and we committed to publishing episodes through the end of the year. That was the contract that Jesse and I signed with each other. And we said at the end of that, we're not saying that it's over, but we're saying that's the minimum. At that point, we can check in, or we'll check in a little bit before that, but we'll check in at the end of the year and say, is this something that, one, we enjoy? Two, are we continuing to learn and grow from it? And three, is this something that we want to continue to learn and grow from? If this is something that has become a chore, that we don't like doing anymore, that we feel like we've really tapped it, like we've talked to the guests that we wanted to talk to, we've done the things we wanted to do, and we're happy with that. I don't expect that we're going to stop at that point personally, but that's the minimum that we've committed to. And then we're tracking all the analytics, right? Like, we're tracking views, we're tracking streams, we're tracking downloads. We publish this on Spotify and also on YouTube. One of the big things for me is figuring out YouTube. So I've done podcasts before. That's something that's not new to me. I mean, Jesse's newer to it. And this show is obviously very different, but figuring out how do we add the video component in a way that's compelling and in a way that's worthwhile, and not just in a way that's convenient to us. And I think that's something that is a personal goal of mine, is thinking about, are there ways that we can edit this differently? Are there ways that we can spice this up, and ways that we can make this more visually engaging? Even though I believe in the audio, I believe in the content that you're listening to when you watch it. Are there ways that we can make it more visually interesting, and continuing to drive and grow that? So as far as like milestones, we're about to hit 500 downloads on just the audio side, which is cool. We may have hit that today, and so that's an exciting milestone. I would love to see it get to 10,000 at some point, which is, my last podcast got to 10,000. And so I'm like, oh, I know it's possible. I know I've done it. Like, we can do that. We can do that. Would love to get to that point, but takes some time. And especially, I think a long form show, the way that this is harder to grow than a short form episodes. Because in the past one, anyone that I talked to, I would say, you should listen to my podcast. Episodes are 4 minutes long. Like, you can fit it in, right? There are episodes that are a minute and a half. You can listen to it while you're brushing your teeth. You have no excuse, right? Whereas this, episodes are an hour. It's a lot of time for someone to commit to things, right? Like, it takes some effort. And so I think it's figuring out, that's not bad. I think these are really great conversations. And I think that I'm learning way more from doing hour plus. I mean, we're at almost 80 minutes right now, like episodes. I think those are way more interesting. I think we can sit in nuance more. I think we can cover more topics in depth. I think we can dive into the meat of things and not just sit at the surface of some topics. But how do we think about positioning that? How do we think about the way that we title episodes? How do we think about the way that we're doing YouTube thumbnails? How do we think about the way that we package the content that sets up listeners' expectations for, this is going to be an hour and a half, or this is going to be an hour. It's not going to be sound bites. There will be sound bites in it, but it's not like, this isn't a compilation. This is a conversation.
Right.
So how do we?
That's a good bar right there. There's a sound bite.
And so how do we think about those things? So those are, I think, some of the milestones that I want to be growing in and growing towards. And then combined, like some of those are the shared goals of, or not goals, but the shared milestones of downloads. Like would love to get it to 10,000 at some point. Would love to, at some point, we're going to have an episode that gets more YouTube views than podcast streams. We're not there yet, but at some point we will. So like those things are fun to watch for, and those things are noteworthy when they happen.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. I'm curious why, if the other one was like having success, why did you stop? Was bite-sized philosophy? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So there's a long answer and a short answer, and I'll do kind of the short answer. So bite-sized philosophy was just me talking into a microphone, and a lot of episodes were pretty personal. I shared my personal phone number at the end of every episode, and I would say, text me, let me know what you think. And I got some texts from people on the other side of the globe that were like, hey, just listen to your episode, that was dope. And I'm like, okay, you're in Pakistan listening to my show. I feel weird that I'm giving my phone number out to the whole world. So some of those sorts of things. But a big thing was my mother-in-law passed away, and so she was someone that I was very close to, and that was a seismic event in my life. And so at that point, I was like, I don't want to process through this into a microphone. And if I'm putting out 2 episodes a week that talk about communication, that talk about dealing with hard things, that talk about some of these philosophical ideas, like that's what I'm going to be talking about, is my grieving process. And I don't want that published. So a big reason was that. And then I let it sit for a year, and then I was ready to kind of move on to something different. So I was ready to play with a different form. I aided staff for a year. I wasn't sure that I wanted to do it right now. So I actually am thinking about bringing it back and doing more with it, because it's been a couple of years now. There's been some time, but the big reason was like losing my mother-in-law. And I was like, I don't want to process that publicly in a microphone. I want to do that with friends and family in a way that's, I think, more honoring to her and more honoring to myself and you know, my wife and father-in-law and all of that. So
right. No, I definitely respect that. That's you want to be personal, like, and I think especially things we're trying to be conversational and all that, but there does come a point where it's like, okay, like this is too personal. Like this is, I need to process this personally, not personally, like with everyone else.
Yeah.
So no, I respect that. If it does come back, I'll for sure have to give it a listen too, because I like what you guys are doing here, and especially since, like I said, there's 2 of you, so I feel like that has, in its sense, like the traits I was talking about earlier. You don't have to have necessarily the same level of the self accountability, or whatever. You have someone else that's right there with you. Like you have someone who's like, hey, cut out the opening notes. They suck. Don't do it. You have someone that's there to talk to you about it. So I think that's a huge advantage already.
It is. I think you're right. Yeah. That's been one of the things, moving from a solo show to a 2-people show has been such a blessing. I went on like a 2-week vacation recently, like in July. Like episodes still happen. Like they still got published. It was the dream. It's amazing. Like those sorts of things are like, wow, this is fantastic. Like, so yeah, it's cool to have a partner in crime.
And it's let us both find our strengths and lean into those a little bit as well. Like, and then I've learned from Joel's strengths, and I think he's learned from mine. And so it's like, it's a very much plays into our growth mindset there as well. Like Joel's really good at reaching out to people he doesn't know very well. And I'm like, not as comfortable with that, but I've seen it happen enough times. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it is possible. It's doable. Right.
It works.
Yeah, totally. Well, Carter, I do want to be respectful of our listeners' time and of yours. So before we close out, we already talked about places to find you. You're on Twitter, you're on LinkedIn, you put your email. Those are all in the description. Do you have any other closing thoughts that you want to share before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, to other freelancers out there, keep grinding. To general show listeners, thanks for listening. And thanks to you guys for having me on. It's been a blast. I'd love to come back one day. We can talk about non-strength things, and I can learn with you guys. That's the whole point, right? It was
absolutely
health, wealth, and wisdom, right?
Yep,
that's right. That's
I
right.
can work on my other aspects of life too.
I love it.
I love it.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you so much,
appreciate it
Carter.
too.
I really
And
appreciate it.
to our listeners, we are giving away a copy of Carter's book. So text us at 503-893-2664. Text us your name. Text us what you thought of this episode. Now we're at the end of the show, so we can say that. And then text us an idea for a future episode, and you can get 3 entries into a drawing that we'll announce in mid-September whenever we publish an episode then. It'll be on a Monday, I promise. So Carter, thank you so much for coming on, and have really appreciated the conversation, and really appreciate that we finally got to get you on a call and make this happen. This has been a blast.
Same to you guys. I appreciate it.
Had as much fun listening to that episode as we had recording it and as we had editing it. Actually, not the editing part, just the recording part was the fun part. Editing is kind of a slog. But I hope you enjoyed that episode. Tune in next week for another episode of Becoming Ourselves. We put out an episode every Monday looking at how to become healthy, wealthy, and wise as young adults. If you are interested in a copy of Carter's book, 365 Days of Freelance Writing, text us at 503-893-2664 with your name for an entry, what you think of the episode for a second entry, your favorite episode of the show for a third entry, and for a fourth entry, an idea for a future show, a topic for a future show. If you're not interested in a copy of Carter's book, text us anyway, 503-893-2664. We'd love to chat, and we always reply. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much for listening to Becoming Ourselves.